Okay, everybody, we are live with the new show, which is launched called The Laws That Matter, Veganism and the Law. I'm Carissa Kranz, and I'm a lawyer. I'm also the founder and CEO of VEG International's Vegan Certification Program. And today we are going to talk about breaking legal news. And with me, I have an exciting panel to lend their insight into all sorts of discussions. What we're going to talk about today is what the Trump administration has decided to do to keep slaughterhouses open amidst workers dying due to the conditions and it being the largest hotbed of COVID-19 outbreak. We're going to also be talking about wet markets around the country and everyone's initiative to try to shut them down. And we're going to talk about how slaughterhouses in general need to be shut down forever. So with me today, we have a panel. There's going to be six. Nora Marino. She's an attorney in New York, a super lawyer who has handled numerous and complex animal litigation cases and is the president of the Animal Cruelty Exposure Fund, a nonprofit. We have Jill Carnegie, who's with us. And she's launched many initiatives in New York City to make New York City a slaughter-free zone. And she is facilitating and has facilitated the formation of Slaughterfree New York City. We have Donny Moss, who is an animal activist, campaigner who makes great videos documenting the movement in New York City for theirturn.net. And we have Edita Birnkrant, who is the executive director of NYCLASS, a nonprofit animal rights and political action nonprofit organization based in New York City. So I'm really excited to have everyone here with me today. And there's everybody on screen. Edita, first of all, I wanted to say congratulations. TMZ did a great feature on you and what's been going on with closing down and your efforts to try to close down the wet markets in New York City. And Donny, thank you so much for helping us with video because CBS News locally here covered the wet markets in New York City and the petition that I filed to try to shut it down based on a proposed rule and a proposed bill in the New York Senate. And then Jill, thank you as well. Everyone here has been amazing and I haven't had a chance to meet everyone really until today. So first of all, let's begin with what's breaking news. So last night on the news, we heard that Trump is signing an executive order to keep slaughterhouses open, which is in effect making it impossible for workers to sue if they are injured or die on the job. Who'd like to go first on that? Maybe Nora, because you're a lawyer here. And as a lawyer, I see issues because now even the existing lawsuits could be thrown out on summary judgment.
Well, workers getting sick at work is generally a workers' compensation issue. So generally, at least in New York State, you can't sue your employer. I'm not sure about the laws in the states where these slaughterhouses exist. But one thing I have noticed about this entire premise is that this issue is being presented to the public as though the meat industry is the main source of food for people. And therefore, if these slaughterhouses shut down, there will be no food. And it's this false sense of panic because there are so many plant alternatives. And this isn't as much of a legal perspective as a personal one and an animal rights perspective and a vegan perspective. There are so many countless plant sources of food that are not only better for the people consuming them, but better for the planet and better for that the president is issuing this order, this executive order to force plants to stay open. And of course, on top of that, with the legal issues of what types of rights is this violating? And it's violating a person's right to be healthy and to not get sick. And this is definitely something, an area of the law I would like to research. I'm sure the lawyers in the states where these slaughterhouses exist are already researching it, but I definitely foresee there's got to be some type of legal action and lawsuits that will come about by this executive order. You can't force people to work in unsafe conditions. You just can't do it. The president is way off on this.
Okay, right. So that brings up an important point. Is this essential? Edita, what do you think?
Of course, it's not essential. And I was very happy to see that yesterday, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine put out a really powerful letter to the White House Coronavirus Task Force, blasting them for this irresponsible, reckless, deranged decision to try to force these places open, and pointing out that these processing plants are hotbeds for coronavirus. There's been serious outbreaks in over 80 of these places in 25 or so states. It is beyond belief that President Trump would be taking this step through executive order to try to force these plants open. And I'm happy to see that workers have been organizing, their unions are speaking out. They are angry about this. They are refusing. So we have to see where this goes. But the fact that this is considered, that we consider meat products more valuable than human lives, not to mention, of course, that all of these plants are responsible for slaughtering thousands or millions of animals that suffer intensely, and that even separate from this pandemic issue, these products that they're creating are responsible for many health crises. You know, animal products being linked to many lifestyle diseases that kill people needlessly, such as heart disease, cancer, diabetes. So these places already are such a health hazard to begin with. But the fact that we have our president trying to force these places to be open during a pandemic, knowing that people are going to die as a result, is outrageous.
Mm-hmm. Is there any link to the current ag-gag laws, which makes it a crime to report the crime of what's going on with the animals? The fact that now the workers can't really report the crimes that are going on with themselves. Do you see any link there? Who wants to jump in on that? Donny? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think anybody has their ag-gag hat on at the moment. I mean, I think that ag-gag exists to prevent animal rights activists like us from exposing the cruelties that take place inside of factory farms and slaughterhouses. So I think that the workers who are there and who don't want to be there for fear of their own health are motivated more by protecting themselves from disease than they are by exposing the cruelty to animals. One irony here that I'd like to point out is that the only reason COVID-19 exists is because of places like slaughterhouses. I mean, the wet market in Wuhan is a slaughterhouse. And so zoonotic diseases are emerging from places like these very slaughterhouses that are being deemed as essential. It's such a disconnect that I think we need to educate the public about.
Yeah, it's a huge disconnect. And what about the fact that in the last week, we've also heard about the high-speed slaughter? Jill, what do you make of the fact that here we are having a monumental transition amidst the coronavirus regarding pandemics making national news that are zoonotic of origin, regarding wet markets that are making headlines when a lot of people didn't even know what a wet market is, and it's a very popular decision to shut them down. But what do you make of the fact that despite all of that, we still have now passed laws for high-speed slaughter to go on in slaughterhouses, and then in addition to that, now we have what Trump did yesterday? I mean, what do you make of this?
Well, I think that what we're seeing here is, number one, there's a spotlight really lighting up for everyone to see at how exploitative and abusive animal agriculture is for everyone. For the animals, of course, in the highest numbers, but also for the workers who are there working in terrible conditions, usually paid very, very poorly, terrible benefits and job security. I mean, this is not any place that anyone would really want to work unless they felt they had other options. Additionally, the environmental hazards that we're all familiar with, and of course, the public health concerns, knowing that the communities around slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants are prone to more respiratory illnesses, asthma, even higher instances of leukemia. This is really environmental racism, because these plants and even the smaller locations exist in areas that are predominantly people of lower income and people of color. And so this industry, animal agriculture, is exploitative and abusive to animals, humans, and the environment every step of the way, from the moment these animals are artificially bred into existence until the moment they are consumed and then wreak havoc on the humans who consume them. Every step along the way, everyone is being hurt. This is absolutely archaic. What we're also seeing is Trump keeping his promise to make America great again by taking us back over 100 years ago, before workers had any rights at all. He's taking us back to the era where it was normative to abuse workers for the sake of profit. And so now he's taking us back way, way further than anyone anticipated. Everyone was worried about him taking us back to, pre-civil rights movement. He's taking us back even further. This is absolutely absurd and a crisis on every single level of justice that exists right now.
Yes, it is a crisis. It's a health crisis. It's a public health crisis. And you said something really important. This is not only injuring the animals anymore, this is injuring us as humans as well, which is why it is breaking news what Trump did yesterday, and it's to do, because it's putting everyone at risk. I mean, let's not forget that the coronavirus was born in a slaughterhouse. You brought up another interesting point about workers and their rights. So Nora, as a lawyer, I want to ask you and talk to you for a second. So now that Trump is signing this executive order, do workers have rights? Is there anything that they can do now to not go to work or to protect themselves? Do they have any legal recourse if they're injured? What can they do?
That's a great question. And as Jill was speaking, I was actually thinking the exact same thing. I mean, I'm a constitutional lawyer. I've done research on dozens of constitutional issues. Part of my practice is civil rights law. But this is such a unique, unprecedented situation that I don't have an answer here. I mean, my gut, my instinct tells me there has to be some rights here, and that this type of order just has to be unconstitutional. You cannot force people to work in unsafe conditions. It takes us back to the days when they were building bridges and there were no safety precautions, and dozens of workers died building bridges and building skyscrapers. And now we have all these labor laws and worker protection laws. I mean, this is taking us so backwards in time. And what's even more complicated is that most of these worker protection laws originate from the states. New York State, for example, my state has a very, very strong labor law. We are very worker protective oriented. This executive order comes from the federal government. So it really opens up a slew of unanswered questions right now that's going to require a great deal of research to look into to see exactly what the rights are. I mean, this is an unprecedented order that is just, warranting these unprecedented questions. Clearly, the workers have to have some rights and should not be forced to work in a situation where they can get sick, die, be injured. I mean, there's a lot of research that needs to be done, but my gut says that this order is absolutely unconstitutional and cannot stand.
Yeah, it is unprecedented. It'll be interesting to see what kind of legal action comes out of it, because the slaughterhouses were being forced to shut down because of their legal exposure and because of the lawsuits that were going to be coming to them. And they knew it was unlimited exposure because it was negligent to keep them open. And they know that the workers were going to say themselves that this is not essential, that their family member is more important to them than the chicken on the assembly line. So we'll see what happens. It is totally unprecedented and totally unfair and totally reckless.
It's unprecedented, and I feel like I don't have a lot of these answers, even though this is an area of law that I consider myself an expert in, because who would ever even imagine an order like this being issued from the President of the United States?
Yep. I guess it's the big dollars and the lobbyists that's behind this. Otherwise, who knows? I don't know why they would do this. It's been world news for weeks now about the closing of these meat processing plants across the country. So with that being said, I know everyone here has put in some significant efforts and has been on the front lines with all the wet markets for a long time before it was even making the news. So I would like each of you to just have an opportunity to say what you're doing and let's just have a conversation and see what you think it's going to happen and where it's going to go. Everybody's hitting this from a different angle. I filed a public petition, which may or may not get an agency response, but according to a proposed bill, if that bill would pass, would require an agency response. But what I did is not proposing legislation, it's not writing a law, and it's not litigation. But I think everyone here is doing something, each in their own way, and each is really important. And Edita, I'll let you go first because I know yesterday you were hot in the news with TMZ.
Yeah, the TMZ situation sort of came about organically, actually, because I'd been posting footage that I had personally taken or others from nearby live animal slaughter markets. And it just so happened that a Facebook friend whose daughter worked at TMZ was so outraged, she sent it, and her daughter sent it to the producers. They were absolutely horrified to realize that these places exist. They wanted to do a story on it. So very quickly, they wanted to interview me. And now what's really great is that, that story got a lot of attention. It was focused on New York City, but now TMZ has done 2 other news stories focusing on the live slaughter market issue in San Francisco. Also today, just one came out that focused on Texas and other areas in California. So they're really kind of showing on a national scale the unbelievable problems associated with these live slaughter markets that many people don't even realize exist. Look, I live in Queens. I live just a few miles away from one of these wet markets. And, a couple of weeks ago during, the height of the pandemic, I went over just to sort of check that these places were still operating. Of course it was. And I posted that footage on there. I think as much as we can get the reality of this out there, Jill's group Slaughterfree NYC has been on the ground focusing solely on getting into the community, educating people. There's other groups that are doing the on the ground stuff. So now we have Linda Rosenthal, an assembly member in New York, who has come forward and is very soon ready to release state legislation that would prohibit the operation of these places. And that's very exciting and hopeful to me. And California is also proposing similar legislation. So is Illinois. So now that we have this moment where the world is paying attention to the over-the-top health hazards that these wet markets pose, and the fact that they are operating during the pandemic in our own country, posing significant health risks. Some of these places in New York have had instances of avian flu detected. These are complete health hazards. And as Jill pointed out, mentioning environmental racism, that's 100% the truth. You would never see these places operating in the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side. It would never, ever happen.
And how long have you been on the ground focused on the wet markets in New York as an issue?
My organization wasn't solely focused on that issue. I've just, as an activist myself, have been involved. There's been the Brooklyn Animal Save that's been going on for years, part of the Save movement kind of, I've documented through Jane Unchained many times going into covering those vigils at different slaughterhouses. So now with the coronavirus crisis heightening this, I've kind of jumped in and gotten a lot more involved, and of course want to help pass Linda Rosenthal's legislation, because my group is a lobbying group that works on passing legislation. So we want to do everything we can to get the word out and help pass this, so we can that be a silver lining of this crisis we're in.
And Jill, I know you're with Slaughterfree New York City, so you've probably been focused on this for a while because you're focused on no slaughter zones. So what are you doing that's different, and what have you been doing, and what do you plan to do?
Well, as an activist, I've been working with other activists on gathering information on these slaughterhouses for years, actually, mostly since Courage the Bull escaped in Queens and then was over-tranquilized by police and died. And ever since then, I started working with Heather Greenhouse, who is on the board of directors for Voters for Animal Rights. She really took leadership on doing the research on this issue. And for my own work, I've been going in and documenting the conditions and reporting the violations for the last several years, in addition to rescuing animals from these markets. Now, what I have seen here is that all slaughterhouses are absolutely horrific, and they need to be shut down, especially when they are in condensed urban centers like New York City. Just the action of delivering the animals creates such a significant health hazard, regardless of whether there's the storefront, like you see in the live animal markets, wet markets, whatever you choose to call them, that even people who are not customers are at extraordinary risk of contracting all kinds of disease. In addition, the numerous animals that I have rescued from these places, every single one of them are sick. And I can tell you right now that every single goat and sheep that I have rescued has been infected with a disease called ORF, which is essentially a strain of herpes. And guess what? that disease is transmissible from goats and sheep to humans. So already these animals in these markets are carrying illness that can be transmitted to humans, who can just walk in off the street with no protective gear, no shoe coverings, as are required supposedly by the Department of Health. You know, they can just walk in off the street, get all of this animal matter, which, you know, I hate to reduce it to that. It's really animal parts. It's their insides littering these floors. And it gets onto their shoes. It gets onto the stroller wheels because they go in with their children. It gets onto the feet of their dogs who they're walking by these places through this debris. And then they're tracking this into subways, into places of business, into their homes. I mean, this is really extraordinarily, it's unfathomable to me that agencies and health officials have not bothered to take notice until we finally were able to get our message amplified, because a pandemic has struck the entire planet. I mean, it took that for people to say, oh, maybe it's not a good idea for these places to be operating. What I'll say is that the cruelty up to the animals in these markets is very severe as well. Some people will say, oh, these places are smaller, maybe it's more humane. Just yesterday, I was in a market in the Bronx, and I saw a chicken in a cage with her wing ripped right off her body. Her humerus was poking.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yes, and yes, I got footage of it. I can't air it yet because it's likely going into a report. But I mean, and I tried to ask them to let me take her to the vet. I begged them to let me take her. And what they did instead was they took her and they slaughtered her right away, which I guess is merciful. You know, but this happens all the time. And that market alone, I've set foot in that particular market 4 times. Out of those 4 times, twice I saw chickens with their wings ripped off their body. The other time that I saw it, we were able to rescue the chicken and get her out. So it's just, this cruelty is inherent, no matter how the operation, no matter where it's located, no matter the cultural affiliation, it does not matter. As long as animals are treated are used for profit, they are being abused. And as long as there are workers required to do that, which there always are when there's profit involved, those workers are being exploited. So this is a whole chain of abuse that needs to stop. We need to move past it.
And are you related to Slaughterfree in other jurisdictions, or is it all connected?
Yes. So what ended up happening was I worked with Edita Birnkrant. She's the founder of the SAVE movement, extensively on other issues, and we became quite close. And in 2019, finally, because she knew how much time I put on this issue, I started a SAVE chapter with fellow activists that was formed specifically to work to shut down New York City slaughterhouses. Through that work, I was put in touch with Robert Grillo, founder of Free From Harm, and also the founder of Slaughterfree Chicago, which was the original chapter to form. Since he and I were working on the same thing, we ended up talking between Robert and Anita, and Slaughterfree NYC was born out of that that friendship and that collaborative spirit that was formed. So we are the first chapter that formed as a full-on partnership between Animal Save Movement and Slaughter-Free Cities, which now is starting to expand really rapidly. So we could not be more excited and honored and humbled to have helped to facilitate the start of that. And I cannot wait for this movement to take the world by storm. And thank you for amplifying this conversation, because the thing that's distressing me the most is that media now is finally covering this issue in the meat plants, but they're not covering the fact that everyone who's distressed by this can opt out of the system altogether by going vegan.
Correct.
I'll have that option.
Yep, that would be the easy way. And then the slaughterhouses wouldn't be considered governmental designations of essential. Donny, we really appreciate all the video that you sent us yesterday. I know the reporters at CBS got to use it, and they're really interested in doing a more investigative piece that would cover the slaughterhouses, not only in New York, but in Chicago and in California and in Texas. And they really are grateful, and I forwarded everyone's footage, frankly, so thank you. But Donny, so you're part of theirturn.net, which is a media company, and it seems like you're working with everybody on these wet markets as well in the front lines. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and your efforts?
Well, sure. You know, I think that we all have to work under the assumption that once society reopens, that the interest among public health officials, among elected officials, among the mainstream public in these wet markets is going to dissipate. So those of us who care about public health, those of us who care about animal cruelty, have to seize this moment to expose the world to the truth about what goes on in these wet markets that sell live animals. So in my capacity as a local animal rights campaigner who produces videos documenting the New York City animal rights community, I've been sort of collating these videos, the videos that you referenced that you're sending to CBS were taken by Slaughterfree NYC and others. And so I'm putting them together and using my platform, theirturn.net, on Facebook, on Twitter, on my website, to expose the public, to educate the mainstream public, to boost these videos, to get them to be seen by the right people, not just by those of us who already care and who already know about the monstrous live animal markets that we have right here in New York City.
Yep, and it is monstrous. That's a really good word for it. Do you think with the high-speed slaughter that's happening, that there's an argument that that is less sanitary than what's obviously slaughterhouses, no matter how much they are regulated, are not sanitary. There's no such thing as humane murder, and there's no such thing as a sanitary slaughterhouse. But is it more unsanitary? Is there a higher likelihood of contagions being spread with a high-speed slaughter, or would it be less because it's quicker? Go ahead. Who wants to go on that? Who started to talk?
It's Donny. I'll quickly say, the president has turned back the clock in slaughterhouse regulations before COVID-19 emerged. But it's not just the president. I mean, right here in New York City, which is a progressive city, our own health commissioner is defending the live animal markets, describing them as not being a risk to public health as long as they're kept clean. But as you just pointed out, how can you possibly keep facilities like this clean no matter what the rate of slaughter is? For instance, in New York City, the animals are stacked up in cages and crowded into pens. They're defecating, they're urinating. It's simply impossible to keep these places clean. To suggest that any slaughterhouse or any live animal market can be kept clean in such a way to prevent disease outbreak is preposterous. Mm-hmm. I'm just afraid it's going to take yet another pandemic to emerge before the public wakes up to that.
Right. Yeah. And that's go ahead, Nora.
Yeah, I mean, and a big problem is that here in New York City, and I believe in cities across the country, the city agencies and the state agencies entrusted with making sure the public health is protected are turning a blind eye to this. And I don't know what it is about slaughterhouses, live animal markets, wet markets, whatever you want to call them, small slaughterhouses, big factory farms. Everyone is turning a blind eye on the federal, state, and local level. And unfortunately, and I agree with Donny, what is it going to take? Like a pandemic that makes COVID-19 look like a walk in the park, COVID-19 on steroids, where people really are dropping dead at exponential rates? Because that's probably on its way if we don't face reality and act responsibly. You cannot breed and confine these animals so unnaturally in these small spaces and in these filthy areas and not expect some type of consequence. But we need our federal, state, and local agencies to step up to the plate and enforce regulations and enforce health codes. And frankly, if regulations and health codes were enforced, these operations would cease to exist because, as I think Jill said and Donny said, they cannot operate safely. They cannot. And what makes it even worse is that there are all these other alternatives. There's all these other food alternatives that are way healthier for us, for the planet, for the animals, all around. And that's what our federal, state, and local agencies should be promoting and focusing on instead of protecting these operations that violate countless laws and put the public health at risk.
Well said. And to answer your question of what's it going to take, it might be a pandemic that is born in our own backyard. I think that the problem is we're able to point the fingers right now at China, and China's not the problem. Yesterday when I was speaking to the CBS reporter, they were shocked they thought that this was an issue that was in New York City's Chinatown, and that this is not something that's actually going on across the United States. So I think it's going to take the media, it's going to take an open discussion, it's going to take you guys continuing to fight really hard on the front lines, whether you're invisible or not, and it might take another pandemic, because if we're not willing to listen now and have proper pandemic prevention hygiene, we are going to have another plague. And that's what this is. This is a plague right now.
I just wanted to make one other point, may have already been said, but we already were in a crisis due to animal agriculture. Many people, many animal activists, health experts, doctors, environmentalists were sounding the alarm about the crisis we were in, the environmental crisis due to animal agriculture, which is undeniably a leading factor in climate change. That already was a huge crisis that was being largely ignored. The environmental movement was called out for that, for not taking on the issue of animal agriculture kind of being the root cause of so many problems. So now this is even more amplified, but we already were in a crisis due to animal agriculture and a human health crisis as well. We know that the consumption and overconsumption of animal products is a leading cause of so many lifestyle diseases. So it was a worldwide crisis already. Our out of control industrialized farming and factory farming, and now people are awakened to the fact that I kind of consider these over 80 live slaughter markets in New York City mini factory farms in a way, because many people don't realize that all the animals being kept in there and killed are trucked in from factory farms. And then they're operating. I think a lot of the people in the communities think that they're getting like fresher, healthier meat because it's killed on the spot. But, you know, the truth is getting out, and we're all unified here in New York City to kind of, get the truth out. Hopefully we can get traction and pass this legislation and keep screaming from the rooftops about, the changes that are needed. Because you're right that we have this moment now in time when people are paying attention, but eventually life will get more back to normal and people will tune it out. People will tune it out and go back to business as usual until the next pandemic, right? But this is the moment to make these changes.
Yes, and this is prime time to do it. I think Donny said that as well, because all eyes are on the media and on the coronavirus right now, and this is news. So this is the only time right now, or the main time, we have the stage to make world news on this topic. Yeah. I'm reading the comments here as we go, and a couple people have brought up the World Health Organization and the UN and their need to step up. And I agree. I know that the Senator Lindsey Graham and Cory Booker, they both called on the World Health Organization. I know PETA's called on the World Health Organization to step up as well. And I think it would be great if the World Health Organization and the UN joined together and had a global ban among countries. But even if they do that, my question is that really enforceable? Nora, I'll let you start with that one.
Is it enforceable?
Is it enforceable? So if the World Health Organization were to come up with a global ban, is that really enforceable, or are we better off focusing on what we can control and ban on our own soil?
Well, I don't know if the World Health Organization has the authority to even do that. I think they can just make suggestions, but I don't know that they have any jurisdictional authority to call for that. I think that has to come from individual lawmakers of, individual countries, states, cities, and localities. I think the WHO can just make recommendations. The question is, if they make that recommendation, are federal, state, local, and municipalities going to adhere to those recommendations? I mean, the WHO already said that these facilities are not safe and are not clean and cannot operate properly. So, and it seems to be going in one ear and out the other, especially to our president, who's ordering that major factory farms stay open despite workers getting sick. So I don't know that they have the jurisdiction to do that. My guess is they don't, and that they can just make these recommendations. The question is, are we going to follow them? And, I just also want to point out, as far as the mainstream media, Good Morning America had a story on last week talking about how these meat plants were shutting down, and they were talking about alternatives. And they actually said, go to your local butcher, try seafood, and try canned meat, Spam. And I was horrified watching this. Like, what about plant-based products? What about beans, legumes, plant-based meats, which are absolutely delicious? What about all these other things? And it just seems like some of these people in the mainstream media are so out of touch with reality. I mean, to make a recommendation to your viewers to start eating Spam instead of, pork cut up in the refrigerator aisle, I was just shocked when all these amazing other products exist. So, we're grateful to people like you for having these types of shows, at least on social media. And Donny with theirturn.net, which is, phenomenal and reaches tons of people. On the organizations like Jill's and Edita's and my own. But we really need to get this message out and hammer it home. Number one, we don't need these products. And number two, they're destroying the planet, and they're going to destroy us if we keep this up.
So I just want to follow up with that. So at VEG International, which is the vegan certification firm that I own and manage, we just certified vegan a plant-based meat line. It was a Jane Unchained exclusive this last week. And it's JBS that launched Planterra's Ozo brand in stores across the nation this month. And the question is are they shifting, or is this them dabbling in it? I've gotten a lot of different feedback, like, why am I certifying something related to JBS? But I feel that this is a step in the right direction. And if we can support a transition, and that the meat industry and the biggest meat players and conglomerates can share in the wins of the plant-based sector, then they're not going to be resisting the movement, because they're going to be a part of the movement. But what do you make of the fact that amidst all these slaughterhouse closures, amidst all this global world news, what do you make of the fact that the world's largest meat processor launched and announced the launch a plant-based pea protein, shiitake mushroom fermentation vegan line? Jill.
Well, I happen to be co-founder of a vegan cheese company, so I can definitely speak to this. I think it's very, very important that we engage these companies who are the biggest animal abusers on the planet and show them that there is significant market share to be had in diversifying into plant-based lines and to vegan food lines. What a lot of people don't understand when they see vegan and plant-based food lines working with, or even being acquired by entities such as Tyson, is that oftentimes in these agreements, now I can't speak to specific ones because those are private documents, right? But generally speaking, in these agreements, when a company is acquired, that parent company now needs to abide by certain standards. And oftentimes that language can include that vegan line will never include any animal products, that vegan line will never be advertised on animal products, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these standards that can be put in place in an acquisition process. And I think that's absolutely imperative, because that's how we get shelf space. That's how Silk soy milk got into every bodega or and corner store and mainstream grocery store like right away, because they were they were acquired by Dean Foods, which is one of the biggest dairy companies in the country, which now is bankrupt. But at the time, they were one of the largest ones. And right away, what did Dean Foods do? In the space of 18 months, they converted a third of their production facilities to producing plant-based milks instead of using them to exploit cows for their breast milk for human consumption. So this is really, I mean, we are still in a capitalist society. We still are in the United States where the dollar is king. And so the most rapid way forward is every single path we can take. And that's going to include working with businesses that can give us that shelf space immediately and at the lowest possible cost, so that vegan businesses can survive. Our margins are much slimmer. We don't have the same bailouts that the meat industry and the dairy industry enjoy. So if we partner with a company to get out there cheaply, or less expensively, I should say, great, then we can survive longer.
Right. And I think that that's a good point, in that the immediate shelf space. And that's one thing that JBS has going for them. I know that we certify at BVEG a lot of companies that are startups and that are struggling vegan owners who have a passion for it, but they don't know how to get into Whole Foods and they don't know how to get into other grocery stores. And it's a long haul. Whereas JBS can launch a company called Plantera and a brand called Ozo and have immediate wide-scale distribution to compete with Impossible Burger, Beyond Burger, and frankly, or Impossible Meat and Beyond Meat, and frankly, be more successful possibly because of their relationships in the industry. I know when Tyson was a large investor in Beyond Meat and he sold his shares, he didn't sell his shares because he stopped believing in the cause. He sold his shares because he publicly announced that he intends to compete in the plant-based space. So I think that these are some wins, and I think that it's a win that JBS at this time in this moment is announcing publicly their launch across stores across the nation and probably across the world soon.
You know, Jill brought up a really good point. I just want to just follow up on, you know, the government bailouts. I mean, that's such a profound point. You know, why do these industries, these animal industries that abuse animals and pollute the environment, get not only a pass on these regulations, but get bailouts when they're in trouble? I mean, it is astounding to me. I think it's a cultural psychology we have that we must exert this dominion over animals and it must be protected at any and all costs. And it's such a deep-rooted psychological phenomenon that needs to be addressed on so many levels. And everyone on this call and dozens and hundreds of activists are doing it every day. But it's really ingrained that we just have this right and this right must be protected. And here in New York, we had a U.S. senator which had a plan to help our flailing dairy industry upstate because of the plant-based milk success. And it was just, it was horrifying that, I mean, the reason the dairy industries here weren't doing well was because people weren't buying them. So people are voting with their wallets and choosing plant-based milks. Why was the government even considering stepping in to bail them out? And this is just so deep-rooted and deep-seated. And every day matters and every struggle matters and every video matters. And, hopefully with this pandemic, we can really turn this around, but it's very deep-rooted in our society.
Yeah, the government subsidization of animal agriculture and meat and dairy and eggs is a huge problem. And it artificially allows the consumer prices of these products to be much, much lower than their real price. So
right.
It's just there's such a very dysfunctional enmeshment between our own government subsidizing, promoting the Got Milk campaign, all of these things. But I think we're at a tipping point. These companies would not be acquiring these new products and selling plant-based products if there wasn't consumer demand, and there is. I think there's been an explosion of consumer demand for these products, and I love the fact that you can walk into a Target or Kmart and there's Gardein products, a whole host of other plant-based milks and products. This helps normalize these products. I've been vegan almost 20 years, and back then you had to go to like health food stores only to find these products. It was a lot harder. It wasn't really so much in the mainstream, but now it's like you can't really even avoid these products if you're trying. So this normalizes it. This makes it more mainstream and makes it more viable as a business. And it clearly is. So the world is changing in terms of the plant-based movement.
20 years ago, most of these products didn't even exist. I mean, 20 years ago, you could get soy milk and one rubbery cheese, and that was it.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Explosion of plant-based meats and cheeses and dairies and ice creams and milks, and it's amazing. I mean, there's no need for this animal exploitation and environmental hazard anymore. That's the bottom. There's no need for it. That's the bottom line. We don't need it anymore. There's plenty of delicious similar alternatives as far as taste and texture go.
And that's a great point. I was born and raised vegan, and back when I was a child, there weren't all the options that there are now. So there's certainly no shortage of options. And with the meat industry, whether it's Tyson or JBS or Cargill or Smithfield, also entering the plant-based space with immediate shelf availability across the world, that makes it even more accessible, which will help with the tipping point, which you're talking about. So speaking about the tipping point, I want each of you to give us some final words on what it is we need to do to actually tip over and go to the other side. Donny, I haven't heard from you in a while, so I want to start with you on what is it that we really need to do to tip and go to have a real shift and move on to the other side of a plant-based world.
I think we need to help consumers understand that by killing animals, we're also killing ourselves. And this pandemic has demonstrated that. And it also helps us build a bridge to the other ways in which consuming animals is killing ourselves. And climate change is probably the other very good example. Not only are we warming the planet as a result of animal agriculture, but we're literally destroying our very own oxygen sources by chopping down the Amazon, which provides us with oxygen, in order to graze cattle and grow soybeans to feed them. And by filling the oceans with animal agriculture runoff, which is depleting our source of oxygen that comes from the ocean, we're literally killing ourselves. And so my lesson here is that we need to use this pandemic to explain to people how consuming animals is killing us, not just the animals.
Right, and that's a great point. It really goes to how we're all connected. You know, we are just a different species, but we're all connected. And if we're killing them, we're killing us, and we're killing our planet too. Jill, what is it that we need to do to tip and cross over to the other side?
Well, you know, I was born similar to you. I was born and raised vegetarian, not vegan, and became vegan a little over 13 years ago. And I have to say, you know, we've seen all of these phases in the animal advocacy movement over that time, right? And there was that period in the 90s that bled over into the 2000s of, you know, being the nice vegan, the one who was polite and not angry all the time, right? And that was important at the time to help promote normalization. What we've been talking about here is that now we've really reached a saturation point where accessibility is absolutely unprecedented. You can go to a Dunkin' Donuts and you can get a breakfast sandwich that's completely vegan and that is affordable. And so now that we have reached this point of saturation, I really think that it's time for justice advocates to return to that unapologetic stance that this is a justice movement and this is an emergency. So we need to stop worrying about being so nice and polite and so cutesy about everything. Yes, still be compassionate, and yes, still be approachable to people and be willing to help them and celebrate their progress. But we need to make sure that this urgency is evident in every single thing that we do. This is not a fluffy, you know, I want to be healthier and thinner kind of a movement. This is about justice, as we've been talking about, for the environment, for humans, for workers, and by the largest number and by the, you know, largest amount of suffering that anyone can possibly imagine, the non-human animals.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Edita, what is it that we need to do as a consumer and as anyone watching this show to really make a difference and affect change rather than just hear? You know, I think one of the problems is that we end up speaking to the choir, and we're all like aligned here and the same, and we need to talk to the masses. So what is it that our listeners here today can do to get the word out? What is it that we need to do to have that shift?
Well, I think my opinion is on a more kind of one-on-one basis for people in your own life. Like, I think food is such an important part of our culture and our lives. So many events and, you know, family and traditions and everything revolves around food in our culture, right? So I think it's really important. And in my own personal experience, it's been really effective in showing people exactly how delicious and accessible vegan food can be, promoting vegan food brands, taking people that aren't vegan out to vegan restaurants, just showing by example, whether that means making meals for people in your life who aren't vegan, like taking them by the hand and saying, look, this is so easy. Go to these restaurants, try this, get Beyond Meat, get Beyond Sausage, like meet people where they're at, and reach out to people to really open their eyes, because oftentimes until people experience something for themselves, they don't believe it. And they have in their head, no, I could never eat that way. That's for other people. That's not for me. It's too weird. But I've had an amazing success in just reaching out to people, making it real for them. You know, food is so important to people. And many of us, of course, have grown up eating certain kinds of food, pizza, burgers. But when you show people how easy it is to still eat that way, and also point out that it's even healthier for them, that really can have an impact. Some of the documentaries that have been out, like What the Health, Game Changers, by recommending those to people, I've had people that I never thought would consider going vegan change their mind after seeing that. You know, when you focus kind of on the health angle and the food angle, you can reach people that wouldn't necessarily care so much about the animal issue. So I think we have to try a lot of different ways, because not everything works for everyone, and you have to kind of reach people where they're at. So that's my thoughts on that.
That is so true. You have to meet people where they're at. When I grew up being vegan, I was made fun of and discriminated against. And I was one of those children that was just like, leave me alone. I want to eat my broccoli. And I am tired of everyone asking me how I get my protein. So it is very true that we just need to meet people where they're at. And now the tables have turned, because when I go out to eat with people that are not vegans or vegetarians, I sense from them a sense of embarrassment when they order, or a sense of them wanting permission to order something off the menu that they feel may be offensive to me. So it is so important to see and acknowledge that we have made progress too, and we will get there. But okay, so Nora, I'm going to finish with you, because you're a lawyer, also like me, and you're an injury lawyer like me. And and I think that that's important, because a lot of injury lawyers have a bad rap, but there are some injury lawyers that have compassion and have a heart, and injured beings include all clients, whether they can pay for you or not. So yes, we have our human clients that are injured that, you know, we can live off of. And then we have our animal clients that we have to represent and work really hard for. And this coronavirus has been an interesting intersection for us and on our careers, because this is something that is injuring both parties. Animals are injured, and now humans are injured. Animals are dying, and humans are dying. Yes. So what is it as a...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, what is it that we need to do as lawyers? I think that the laws are obviously deficient. We need the lawmakers to draft legislation. That's, you know, we have people like Allie, who's going to join us today, who's helping spearhead those movements. We have Donny, who's doing the media. We have nonprofits that are popping up that are doing really great work on the front lines. But laws also need to be changed, and laws need to be made. So what is it that lawyers can do? What is it that we can do? What is it that you can tell other lawyers to do that have a passion for this to step up?
I mean, you know, I became a lawyer, and I'm sure you became a lawyer, because we wanted to fight injustices. And an injustice is an injustice is an injustice, whether the victim is a human or a non-human animal. An injustice is an injustice. And as lawyers, you know, I mean, we need to be creative with lawsuits. It's very difficult, because in most states, animals are considered property under the law. I run into this problem. I know many other attorneys and animal attorney organizations have run into this problem, where your cases get dismissed for lack of standing. You know, that needs to be changed. And I have a case right now where I'm going to be trying to work on that. You know, it's a difficult challenge, but I'm going to give it a shot. But there's, you know, the laws need to be changed on every level, from the political to the courts, the legislatures. We need to attack it from all angles, but people need to see the irony. And I like to point out this irony. If you watch TV and you see commercials for, you know, meat products and dairy products and egg products, and, you know, happy people consuming all these animal products, then the next commercial is a pharmaceutical commercial to take medications and prescriptions to address all the illnesses that develop from eating all these animal products. And then the next commercial is from a law firm suing the pharmaceutical companies for all the side effects from taking the medication you take to cure the illnesses that occur from eating the animals. The irony is obscene. If we just stopped eating the animals, we would avoid all of this and be a healthier, happier society living in harmony with the environment. And as Donny brought up, you know, the climate change, like there's just, a million reasons to stop eating animals and go plant-based, and there's really no reason not to. So all of us just have to keep doing our part to educate, change laws, create laws, make new case law, and fight for justice.
Right. And I think it's important that everybody does whatever their skill set is to get there. So some people are best on the streets doing activism and are very effective and powerful that way. Other people are great at drafting legislation. Other people are great at bringing about litigation and making law that way. So it really is important that we work together as a team and committee this, because it's going to take, we're up against the biggest billion-dollar companies and lobbyists. And I do think the law, we're on a law show, right? The law is on our side, but we have to fight for it. And these are the laws that matter, right? These are the laws that matter. These are the laws we need to make, and these are the laws we need to create. And our Constitution was drafted with these higher laws that we're supposed to keep in mind. And the way our planet is right now, we are not minding these higher laws. We are living and breathing a planet that is full of suffering and pain and animal slaughter. And until we get it and can make the laws, I think we're never going to have peace on this planet. Any final thoughts? I really appreciate everybody who's been here today for the first show of the Laws That Matter. And we'll definitely have everybody back again soon to talk about your individual issues. I know, Nora, you're working on a case, but I'd love to have you on with Nicole, who helped make case law in California for animals who have pet status to get emotional pain and suffering and not be considered property. So I think that would be a nice show.
Those types of cases, that's a step. I mean, we're not going to go from animals being regarded as property. In other words, my dog has the same value as the table that this computer is sitting on. It's absurd. But to get that one step, maybe we'll give some type of rights for cases regarding companion animals. And then you go to the next step and the next step. And it's just a fight, but every step matters, and every step matters. These are the laws that matter, and it is a slippery slope. And I think that's what we are up against too. The meat industry and animal agriculture know that this is a slippery slope. So if we win the battle with wet markets and live markets, what does that mean for factory farming? Right. And that's why these live markets are still open. Because I got that question yesterday with CBS News. Well, if everybody's for this and the World Health Organization is being petitioned on both sides of the aisle, why are these markets still open? They're still open because nobody wants to bring attention to it, because everyone wants to turn a blind eye, because it's not a convenient thing to deal with right now. Because if we deal with that and if we have a ban, based on the underlying arguments of why we would have a ban, which is public health crisis, a pandemic, contagion, zoonotic origin, all of that is going to transfer over eventually to factory farming. As soon as you have the next swine flu outbreak, avian flu outbreak, mad cow's disease outbreak that's going to wipe out a population, they know it's going to go from live animal markets to factory farming, and then it's going to affect their bottom line business. So a lot of interesting things to discuss, and we must keep up the fight. And thank you guys for being on the front lines and doing that for such a long period of time. And if anyone has any final thoughts, otherwise, I think we can all join again next time. Anyone have anything final? Nora, Edita? I just want to say about the bottom line. It doesn't have to affect their bottom line if they just transition over. Like Jill was saying, there was that company, what was it, Elmhurst Dairy, I think. They do all plant milk now, right, Jill? Is it Elm something?
And their sales actually ended up being triple their initial projections in the first 3 quarters that they transitioned over to completely plant-based milks.
Yeah, that's incredible. So no one has to go bankrupt here. Just transition. Do something different. Do something better for humans, better for the environment, better for animals. Deal with plants.
Right. So JBS's Planterra product, Ozo, which is launched this month in stores across the country, they are sending us products. So we should do a lunch break live and see what these products actually taste like, and if they are a good substitute, because obviously we want them to succeed. We want them to feel financial wins in the plant-based sector. That's the way to transition.
The time has never been better than for people to make the upgrade to a pandemic-free, humane, eco-friendly, healthy, plant-based diet.
Mm-hmm. And one last thought, since this show is about laws, you know, the way that we help pass laws is everyone watching, everyone who cares about this issue needs to become politically active. You know, laws get passed or don't pass based on pressure. When you pressure your elected officials, and if the other side has more people against your cause, you're not going to win. So that's why the work that NYCLASS does, also Voters for Animal Rights, and actually getting these laws passed and getting the people who care politically active and involved and engaged. You know, it can often feel like one person doesn't have power, but you do. For your elected official, that's a vote. They care. And when they know you're part of a larger community and you're a political force, that's how you win for animals.
Yes, and I think that it's important that everybody pay attention to that New York Senate bill that I relied on to draft my petition, because it's been sitting in the Senate for 2 years. And I think that that should be on the top of everyone's agenda in New York to get that passed, because what that bill means, if passed, is that it would require an agency response. Right now, with petitions, there's no required response. It's just a petition like change.org and, you know, whatever. It doesn't really go anywhere. It ends up in the atmosphere, but we're not seeing the change. But if you get that bill passed and you can file a petition with 100 New York resident signatures that would require an agency response as if an agency filed it, I think that activism, whether you're a lawyer or not, would become a lot more effective, especially just in New York. And other states have the same problem. They don't always require an agency response to petitions for rulemaking. It's different than on the federal level. And every state, you could look at your local laws and rules, but if you don't have a law or rule and you're interested in legislation, you should consider drafting legislation that matches the New York Senate bill that's been sitting there for 2 years, because that type of bill should be passed in every jurisdiction, because we are a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that bill even says that exact language in why and in justification that bill should be passed. So that's something to consider, just while you have a parallel course with the animals, to just get that bill pushed along and voted on in the Senate in New York, if you have the ability to pull those strings and make that a priority, because in the end, that'll make your activism, I think, more successful, because they can't ignore the petitions. Even if they turn it down, they can't ignore it. They have to still respond. So that being said, anyone else, or last final thoughts?
Thank you for doing this, and good luck with your show. Congratulations on your first episode. We'll be tuning in.
Yeah.
Thank you. And yep. So thanks for joining us, everyone who's been watching. I see we have had a lot of comments. We'll go back through them later, and about 100 people watching in and out of the show. So that's great news. And it'll be next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So thanks for joining. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Go vegan.
Go vegan.